Very happy to have Dr. Mark Sherwood here. He just finished a run for GOP governor of Oklahoma. You're no longer in the race, but I figured you'd be a good person to comment about this, Dr. Sherwood, among many other things, which we'll get into. And just a heads up to everybody watching on YouTube, this is going to be another one of those short and sweet streams, as I like to call them, because we're going to have to go elsewhere to make sure we can talk about COVID and global politics and all that good stuff. But Dr. Sherwood, I wanted to bring your attention to Dan Rather's tweet. There was a lot of this out there right now.
Yeah.
If Liz Cheney is defeated today, as expected, I would not frame it as her losing. It is a loss for Wyoming, the Republican Party, and the nation. And so that was before her loss was announced. And now, after, she told the Today Show that she is considering running for president. And as CNN frames it, she vows to carry on the fight against Trump after conceding defeat in Wyoming primary. And everywhere I look, when it's sort of a mainstream talking point, CNN or NBC, you get this kind of thing right here. It says a lot about the Republican Party and nothing good, or Republican Party was already bottom of barrel, but now it's worse. Essentially, because I think Cheney was framed in a lot of ways as like the last standing voice for democracy in the Republican Party or something, or like non-fascism. And now it's just, that's it. And so let's start, I guess, maybe with that. Since you ran as a, in the GOP primary as kind of a new wave in the GOP and might be considered that, oh God, the bottom of the barrel Republicans.
Yeah.
What do you think about her? Before we talk about that, just generally speaking, that idea of like what's happening within the Republican Party, let's talk about her. And do you think that, Dan Rather's right? It's a loss for the Republican Party, that it's a symbol of a negative reflection for the Republican Party. What are your thoughts on her loss?
Well, I think with elections in general, you're going to lose some, you're going to win some. I think that's an obvious fact here, and she did not win the election. A lot of those tweets, Allison, tend to go towards the party or towards the nation. But the thing that's really got me with this, and I don't agree with Dan Rather's tweet in that, because it's not about the idea of freedom. We as people need to be the focus of all politics. It should be about we the people. And, those tweets are, some of them are kind of, slanted one way or the other, and yet it's not about the people. Now, from being in the race and in politics, in a major candidacy and election, I will tell you that there's a lot of problem within the party system. There really is. It's become almost a uniparty situation that's driven by, well, the almighty dollar. And that's troubling, because as we all know, the love of money is the root of all evil. And that can get into anybody. And so, I don't really agree with Mr. Rather's statement about it's a loss for the Republican Party, because, in all fairness to, Miss Cheney, she was branded that way, by the media. And because of that, I don't know her. She has a belief system that is different from a lot of people's. But as I was sharing with you before we were live, I think it is important that we be able to handle without, anger, someone else's views that may differ from ours, because that's how we, build bridges. And that's the beauty of this constitutional republic, if we can hang on to it.
Showing you here, she made a statement in her concession speech that Abraham Lincoln was defeated in elections for Senate and House before he won the most important election of all, and has gotten a lot of flack for comparing herself to Lincoln. And then that was, I guess, a sort of a precursor to her announcing that, yeah, she's considering it, but she's not going to say anything, specific. But I wonder what you think about the connection, because see, they go right back to the Trump thing. Like, she's constantly juxtaposed to Trump. It's always this way.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, when I was in TV news the day after the 2016 election, I remember a lot of my colleagues posting on their personal Facebook pages that they were completely freaked out. Their kids' lives were over, thanks a lot. And then they would go in and they're like, oh, but I'm a journalist, I'm going to be objective.
Right.
But I remember saying to them, what you really need to understand more is the people, like why the people voted for him. What is going on with the people? Because it could be him or somebody named Joe or Francis or whatever else. There's something among the people that you should be paying attention to, because he will come and go, but that's a larger phenomenon to understand. And instead of going at it like, if we just got rid of him, we'd have all our problems solved. I just disagree that I think you're looking at it myopically, in other words. So when you look at Cheney and her loss, what are your thoughts on that? On, just the idea, I guess, that she's been juxtaposed with this guy. And is it really Trump that people are voting against her for, or is there something else? Are there other ideals that she represents the opposite of, or people are concerned about, that they decided in large numbers to get rid of her over?
Well, this is what I observed from being again on the inside. And to your point earlier, and I thought you very well said that, even after the 2016 election, we want to put our hope and faith in persons, but Allison, our hope and faith has always got to be in principles. And people in that election were fighting and standing up against what many believed, majority of this at that time, that the government was too bureaucratic, too powerful, too controlling, and they wanted to see change. They wanted to see the system broken. And I do believe that Mr. Trump represented an alternative to the system, or an outsider coming in, a non-politician going in there, and people were looking for that. When you look at Ms. Cheney in this case, she was pushed into that category of the establishment that Mr. Trump was representing, going against. So I think people were probably voting again under those same ideals and principles. They wanted the system broken. And I don't know, her, and I suppose she has her reasons for believing the way she does. And okay, great. But I am concerned, very much so, that we, the people, are getting our focus onto people more than principles. The constitutional principles are key, and the federal government's gotten too big. It's gotten too powerful. I think most people that know the Constitution agree with that. And the states and the people have gotten too minimal in that power setting. And so, the old definition is like this. You got tyranny is the idea of when the people fear the government, and then freedom is when the government fears the people. And I don't mean that in a violent way. I just think that's kind of what people are looking for. They want their voices to be heard once again. And I think they're afraid, from the most part, from the conservative side, that their voices are not being heard again by the establishment as a whole. And the establishment doesn't want to be disrupted as a whole because it's comfortable.
Interesting. So one of the other things that's kind of going around is that she's like the last of the two who voted to impeach Trump. Everybody else is either retiring or lost their primary. And again, like we were discussing, I think this goes back to this idea that you will suffer if you go against Trump. I don't know. I'm not a political expert. I don't know if everything that somebody like Liz Cheney has faced in her efforts to increase her popularity have had to do with Trump or not. But I do have questions about that. I don't, I hear a lot of people concerned about her family's political legacy. Like even the guy on CNN, when he was in Jackson doing his live report about it, he's talking about like her mom and dad, and they're watching her speech, and it's like it's a new era for Wyoming politics. Like this dynasty has almost been uprooted. And when I just pay attention to the comments in my comment section, or I as I'm talking to people about their concerns over these sort of family political dynasties, or people like who have Joe Biden. I think I heard him say he entered politics at 29. I mean, the guy's been, that's his right, as his whole life has been. I think people are kind of over that. The names that they've been hearing for decades now. And yes, I think there is still a tie to sort of the Trump era, but I don't personally think you can blame everything on him. I think it like you said, it has to do with this idea of a political dynasty, really, that's voted in a way that, I don't know, people, they're just kind of sick and tired of, and they don't necessarily see a difference between Liz Cheney and maybe even Nancy Pelosi. They start to look the same, and I don't know if people are actually more educated on how they're voting or not, because like I've seen some people say, well, Cheney voted with Trump 93% of the time. So, that she's just, that would be an argument again for sort of the extremist part of the Republican Party. Like, oh my gosh, 93% wasn't even enough. Like, what are these crazy lunatics that are still, still in the Republican Party? Like, they don't even like her. But they look at wars now, financial packages, COVID policy, all this stuff that I think more generally speaking just represents, like you said, a disenfranchisement from being a participant in their government. And I feel like she represented that. And that's the same reason why people, they thought that about, I guess, Trump was going to reverse that, or he was going to be the opposite of that. That to me would be what I would focus on. What are the people saying that it's not these players, but this sort of swell of public thought about them.
Yes, it's definitely, as we stated a moment ago, it should be about the principles. And I do agree with you that there's a massive disenfranchisement of people today. You can go around and ask a lot of the conservative people, and even some Democrats, do you trust the federal government? And the answer is probably going to be no, or not really. But you're not going to find many people that say absolutely 1,000%. So this whole establishment idea, and I kind of refer to it as a uniparty, idea, people are kind of tired of that. I saw that in my state in the campaign very, very clearly. And I think that, fortunately or not fortunately for Miss Cheney or not, she was put into that category. I will say this too about, when we look at the headlines about the people that voted for impeachment from the House, and now we're kind of keeping score. It's concerning to me. I tell you that we're using a litmus test on who to elect based upon that one thing. I think we should look at the whole person, who represents those principles that represent the people the best. And that means smaller government and bigger people's voices. And my biggest concern with this is that whole sort of test, filter, funnel, if you will, has been left out. And I'm hoping that there will be some cooler heads prevail as we get into the election cycles more and more and more into the general election, because we sure need right now good, at least godly, believing, constitutional awareness leaders right now more than ever.
Somebody says against Trump, or was it against the people? I think referencing again that dichotomy. And I think like if we were to go back to the CNN article, this reminded me of it. Cheney said American democracy faced an existential threat, that our survival is not guaranteed. And what I think is actually that people who voted against her would agree with her on that statement. But the difference is they would see her as the threat to American democracy. So that's where these people are missing they're missing the message, is that somehow they have convinced themselves that there's an existential threat to democracy, which actually a lot of people would agree with them. Their opponents would agree with them on. But who is the threat and what is the threat is where I think the divide is. And once again, it just, it goes to show, I think people are just the folks who voted to take her out of her office and to choose her opponent saw her that way. that she was the threat. And so, you know, and I don't know, in my old industry, there have been ample opportunities to learn when you have large crowds yelling fake news at you, for instance, or the polls continue to come out and the trust is low. You have the opportunity, I think, to sit back and reflect and say, you know, what are we doing? You know, what are we doing that has potentially encouraged this environment? Or you could say, this means we need to double down even more. Because look at, you know, we need to really get our messaging tighter, and we need to even work even harder at what we're doing, because obviously we're missing all these people. And I don't know where she stands on that, but I do see I do see that trend where you're offered the opportunity for self-reflection and, you know, potential growth from it. And instead it's like, it just proves even more that we have an existential threat. And I see that in these articles about her. Like, instead of saying, man, you know, what is it that Cheney represents that may, you know, the opposition may be pinning accurately? It's like, no, it just proves it's even worse than we thought, you know. And the journalists do the same thing. It's like, it's worse than we thought. It's not us. it's the people out there are worse than we thought. And I don't, you know, I like the fact that she's like, I'm going to run for president, or I may run for president. She's not saying she definitely will. Makes me think even more so that she's like, okay, well, I'm just, you know, I'm just the martyr here. You know, I'm just taking one for the team. Instead of saying, maybe, you know, what is it about what's going on right now that it may be easy to blame on Trump, but maybe there's a couple fingers pointing back at me.
Yes, I do think that people are missing the point. And again, even like the comment was a moment ago, is this against Cheney or for Trump? What does this mean? It shouldn't be either or. It should be for this constitutional republic. Whatever we believe as a people that represents the constitutional republic the best, that's who we should put into office. And that should be that test. And for whatever reason, you know, and I look at the media mainstream, Allison, as well, that we don't anymore see a very balanced approach. It's always one extreme or the other, one side or the other. But frankly, you know, that's not leadership, and that's not unbiased. You know, the media has a chance to steer these ships in different directions. And I can only hope that, you know, even the people listening today would say, okay, like you said very eloquently a moment ago, what are we learning from this movement? What does this mean for the people? What does it represent for the people of our future? What does it mean to our constitutional republic going forward? Not what it means to Mr. Trump or Miss Cheney, even though, you know, people are very emotional on both sides. But what does this mean for the people? And our survival is not dependent upon one person. I plead people to understand that that's not true. Our survival is bent on us as the people, our willingness to stand up and protect, you know, the constitutional rights that we have, stand firm in them, understand them, teach them to our children, make sure they're taught in school, in churches, our communities, our homes, so that we know what we're standing for, know what we're fighting for, and really know the gift, the blessing that we have in this thing called freedom that is represented here in this constitutional republic.
Okay, so one of my final questions on this topic then is, you chose to run within the GOP party. Do you think that did you do that to run as a correction to it? Do you think that these trends we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes are good or bad? Like, where do you fall on that reaction to all this? Like, oh man, it's bottom of the barrel. The party is showing how bottom of the barrel it is. Or do you think the new candidates that are coming up are a reflection of a positive correction for the party, or is it neither? I mean, I'm just curious how you see it.
When I began to explore, you know, a few years back, the idea of running for office through prayer, I want to make sure that that's clear to people. I wasn't just doing it for me. I was an independent at the time, actually, Allison, and because I was sick of politics, a lot of people are, I felt disenfranchised or underrepresented as well. And I actually read the Democratic platform stance. I read the Republican platform stance. When I read the Republican platform stance, the way it was written, I read that as, wow, I believe that. That is me. That is guarding and protecting the Republic. And so I read that thing piece by piece, line by line. And at that moment, I decided that that's what I stood for. But then when I got into the race, I understood that the majority of the Republicans in my state that were in office, were running for office, didn't know that, didn't do that. It was the opposite. They just didn't know. They were part of that establishment. And so I traveled around the state of Oklahoma in the campaign with a GOP platform stance in one hand and a Constitution in the other. And all I did was educate people on those things. And to your point, to try to bring awareness and hopefully make a difference in bringing the party back to where it said it was supposed to be. Because if you're not aware of your compass, not aware of the moral compass and the physical compass, you're going to get lost. And I observed the Republican Party, at least in my state, get kind of lost off course. I watched the Republican Party and even most parties get lost off course regarding the Constitution because they forgot to look at the compass. And we have drifted. So on one hand, it was to bring correction. The other hand, it was to bring awareness. And probably the third hand, if there were, just to be obedient, to go out there and serve and honor my fellow man in a way that was honorable.
Okay. One question, since you have a background in law enforcement, quite an extensive background in law enforcement. I mean, maybe would you like to explain real fast your background? And then I'm going to ask you about that in the Constitution, mostly because I heard you in another interview say, and I'm a little nervous to get into this topic fully because we're going to cut the stream on YouTube and then we could talk about medicine under COVID because you're a naturopathic physician. But you were in law enforcement for a while. And so you were telling this person whose show you were on that when you were practicing and, there was all this contention around like early treatment. Like I said, I'm choosing my words carefully, that you felt like you were okay if you were abiding by the Constitution, that a law enforcement officer, if they were ordered to do something unconstitutional, would not do it.
Right.
Okay. But I've had people on like Catherine Henry, for instance, who was a constitutional attorney who was, she had to go through 2 years of fighting in court to prove that the cops who arrested her were acting unconstitutionally. So I've seen that happen. So I wanted to ask you about that. When you're talking about the Constitution and law enforcement and its role, I mean, I know this is not really the, kind of in the election sphere, but how do you think through that? Because when I heard that, I thought, well, Catherine wouldn't say that. I mean, she would say that there are law enforcement officers that are doing things in the name of unconstitutional orders. Where's the role of law enforcement in all that?
Well, I have been known to just speak truthfully, regardless of the consequences. So, honestly, I served my community in a major police department for 24 years, 10 years of which was on the SWAT team. And I can tell you that there's something called interpositional leadership. And just to explain that, if I have a superior officer giving me an order that is unconstitutional, unlawful, maybe immoral, whatever you want to put in the M's there, I have a duty, not a choice, but I have a duty to stand in that gap interpositionally between and say, I respectfully will disobey that order. And I do that because of my love for my fellow man and my love for my superior officer. Because sometimes we're given mandates or edicts or orders that are not constitutional. And it requires the people, the law enforcement officers, even military people, to have the courage and the backbone and the fortitude to stand up against those unlawful rules and not do them. And to me, that's the courageous heart that is the true protection and servant officer in our lands. And there's a lot of them out there. I work with them. I know them. I still maintain a good relationship with them. So that's what I mean by that. And I think that we need more of that right now. And to the point, just to be real, direct with it, if a law enforcement officer, for example, was told and knew the Constitution, was told to go to a church, for example, and arrest somebody for opening the church, and the church was not opening they were opening because they felt like they were given an unconstitutional order, right? And so that officer, in my opinion, should not do that, because the government really has no authority over the church from a constitutional standpoint. Now, this requires great knowledge. It also requires great wisdom, discretion, and courage. And so that's kind of what I mean by all that.
So in the situation where the officer shows up to do that, what's your recommendation for the churchgoer? Do you abide by the arrest and then you fight it out in court? It seems like resisting arrest doesn't go well for people. So, but then you end up, the other edge of the sword is that you end up having to spend a lot of money out of pocket to fight the government when they're using your tax dollars to fight you over a constitution that they should know. Right. And you shouldn't have to be policing them constantly. I mean, I think that's a mess. The situation where we're like in court all the time, especially COVID really kicked a lot of that off. Yeah. To just fight a government that should, I feel like should know better.
Well, I feel like they should know better, but unfortunately they don't. As I stated, I did carry around the Constitution, and I said it so many times, the 10th Amendment, I talked about that, the powers not specifically given to the Congress were retained, by the people in the states respectively. And I just heavily paraphrase that. Then you look at Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, you see 18 powers given to Congress, not 1,800, or certainly not 1,800,000. And then you see the president's powers there as well, which are less, by the way. And so you realize that we have, over the course of time, given up far too much power. And the only way to regain that is to really stand up against that in a peaceable, respectful, and honorable way. And to your point, what I would tell people right now, and I do encourage people, if, especially in my example of the church, if you were told to close down again, my response would be, and recommendation would be, don't. Be respectful, be kind, and be open. And if all the churches that really were churches around these United States of America were open, it would be too much for the government to handle, which brings us right back to the point of the government fearing the people equals freedom. And I'm not saying fear as in weaponry and all that stuff. I'm talking about fear of the people rising up and their voices being heard too much. And I think that is the crux of the issue, even tying it all together with the election stuff that we're talking about. People do feel underrepresented, and they're getting tired of being overrun. They're getting tired of being controlled, and they really want to trust government again, and they want to put people in there. And I think that boils down to, why we're in the mess we're in right now, probably.
I know that you wanted to talk about individual knowledge and responsibility before we cut the stream on YouTube. So I want to give you the chance to do that. Go ahead.
So, our biggest concern right now that I've observed from my, my current career and my past career, and, you're right, we've had a lot of blessings that my wife and I have been able to see, and I give God the glory for that. Again, I operate in godly principles. I love people that are ungodly. So there you go. But people today, Allison, are becoming more and more dependent upon big government, big food, big medicine, and even big church. And so to that end, we are forgetting the very premise of what makes our country great. The ability to go out here and achieve the American dream, to do what you want, how you want, when you want, earn your living, make a living, make as much money as you want, go work, get paid, spend it the way you want, not be controlled. And when we're dependent upon big government to give us a check, we're dependent upon big food to make sure that you make food cheap enough. We're dependent upon big pharma to make sure that we're well by giving us some medication. And we're dependent upon big church, for example, to teach us how to read the Bible. These things should be in us and in our hearts. And this idea of self-governance, self-government, self-care should be the preeminent focus of every mother, father, family out there. And I think that idea, to not need these things, but to be able to appreciate them, but not need them as a dependence, where we can live independent of those things, which really is the epitome of the reason we celebrate Independence Day every year, because we didn't want to be controlled. And I think that that's an important factor. And that's what we teach where we are, because I want people to be able to care for themselves and be able to use the resources we have in a wise way.
All right. So we are going to cut the stream on YouTube. You all should make sure you sign up on AllisonMorrow.locals.com. We have a chat going over there right now. I'm also live on Rumble and ROKFIN. But if you join my editorial board on Locals, you can post questions ahead of time for people like Dr. Sherwood. It gives you the chance to be the news, I guess, instead of just having a top-down model. But he is someone who's treated COVID patients, and so we can't talk about that. We're going to talk about elections. Can't talk about that. I'm trying to think of what else. There's a lot of stuff we probably can't talk about. So we're not going to take the chance. So sorry if you're on YouTube. We'll see you on the other platforms. Again, AllisonMorrow.locals.com. I will say, as kind of a closing thought, someone here, that Cheney didn't seem unhappy when she gave the concession speech. Maybe she didn't care because she's going to run in 2024. Might be spoiler to split the conservative vote, desperate to stop Trump. Deals have been made. Who knows? I mean, I honestly don't know. I'm not behind the scenes. Like, that's way above my pay grade to know what intentionally is really going on. However, I remember having Rich Barris on. He does, he's called the People's Pundit. He does a lot of polling and does it in a different way. It gets a lot of different results than sort of the mainstream establishment type polls you're used to hearing about, because he asks questions differently. And I think, produces results that are, I think, challenge some of the ideas, like 80% of this believe that. Is that true? Or is that because you asked the question this way, or the way you polled and that kind of stuff? And so he's an interesting guy to talk to, but he said Cheney's going to run as a Democrat for president or whatever her next office is. So we'll see if he's right.
Wow.
I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of people don't see much of a difference between the two parties anymore anyway.
That's right.
It wouldn't be much different. Okay. If you're on YouTube, we'll see you next time. Head over to the other